Batman The Long Halloween has been out for about a year or more as a two-parter on HBO Max, and it is based off the comic book Batman The Long Halloween. I watched both parts of Batman The Long Halloween about roughly 3 or 4 months ago, and there were definitely some parts in which I was questioning certain characters as certain characters didn't quite act how I thought certain characters would act based on how much I know of them, like Jim Gordon, Harvey Dent, Batman. And even though I hadn't read the story, I knew roughly what went on with it. So I was kind of confused at some of the changes they made from based on what I know, and I didn't even hadn't even read the story. Then I finally got my hand on a copy. I read it, and oh boy, there were definitely some changes that they decided to make. So yeah, that's what this one's about. There were definitely some odd changes that they decided to make, and oh boy, right out the gate, it is definitely a different story with just the same name just slapped on it. I made a list, made a long list of all the problems I had with it, all the problems I saw with it, and I could. There's some that I could probably that could probably be rationalized out on this. I'm not going to deny that, but a lot of this stuff just doesn't really make much sense as to why they decided to do this. Now, it's definitely one of those ones where the comic book is way better. Like most cases, the book is way better than the movie. And this is definitely the case. Now, these are all the problems I had with Batman The Long Halloween. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, it's been out for a year. But yeah, spoiler alerts for both parts of the year-old movie and then the 20-year-old comic book. So that's kind of your fault on that one. Now, after watching it first time and then reading the comic book, I went back and watched it again because one, I had forgotten most of the movie because it just wasn't that memorable. And then two, whatever I did remember, this kind of took over as the comic book was way more memorable than movies ever were. One of the things I noticed at the beginning of the film was during the beginning credits roll is the movie decides to pull on your nostalgia heartstrings with the opening credits showing you pictures of the of the Batman Long Halloween comic book and kind of just showing you stuff that was in the comic book that they're going to try to put in to this movie. However, that's not really the case. And a lot of the shots that are in the opening credit scenes aren't even in the movie. Another one of the things I realized right off the bat was after watching it the second time, one of the things I remember one of the things I realized was the movie skips a lot of comic book scenes and interesting bits that would have made it a good detective story and added stuff. Not only did it take away stuff from the comic book, it also added stuff that wasn't necessary to the story at all, to the point where it just became annoying and kind of bland. It really didn't do much to add to it, kind of just hurting the whole thing as to why'd you take stuff out and then put new stuff in that the old stuff would have done way better. A couple of the things I noticed, and there's a long list of them that I noticed the differences between not only the horrible things that were in the movie, but also the things that made a difference between the comic book and the movie. One of the things I also noticed in the movie is that it uses new and old dialogue interchangeably, with the old dialogue from the comic book kind of trying to give you off that nostalgia, whereas the new dialogue is just crummy and boring and doesn't really make much sense. And the old dialogue is good, but it's also crummy because it's not where it needs to be. And it's good, but the story that it's telling, the dialogue really doesn't fit. Whereas the story in the comic book, the dialogue fits. Yeah, it's just a whole bunch. It's a hodgepodge of a mess. It's essentially the Frankenstein. It's trying to create its own story and make its own story, but just putting on the name and trying to put in as much nostalgia as it can just to kind of throw you off the scent. And a good thing to catch on about this is the old dialogue will refer to Carmine Falcone as the Roman, whereas the new dialogue will call him the Godfather, and they'll have a whole bunch of Godfather references in the film, especially some of the ones I caught where it was just like, why? And then I remembered at that time the 50th anniversary of Godfather was coming out, so that was probably the reason why. It was either coming out around that or close, so they were probably trying to play that off. There is that Catwoman and Batman run in which Catwoman shows up Batman during their run, and in the run, actually, from the comic book standpoint, Batman actually surprises Catwoman. So I don't know why. I can guess why they tried to do that. I'm not going to hold my breath for a proper explanation. In the comic book, Catwoman gives Batman the info to where to find the money. However, she's never there. She just gives him the info, and then he just takes it and goes there, and he meets with Dent there. They decide to burn the money, and that's it. And not only this is a problem, but they also skip over the idea. They skip over the whole concept of at the beginning. They're actually there at when they Bruce Wayne meets with Falcone. They're actually there at Johnny Vidi's wedding, the first guy who was killed. And they skip over a whole bunch of this stuff where it is interesting. And you know why Falcone is putting all the money in a warehouse. In the comic book, Falcone extends his hand to Bruce to help launder money. And when Bruce says no, he already has enough people to like help launder the money. He just decides to let Bruce in on the fold because of his parents. Bruce, as Batman, goes and scares the president away, the president of the bank that is laundering money, Falcone's money, away, and he scares him away and makes him quit being the president of the company, and so he basically goes to leave. So with that in mind, Holiday later on in the issue goes and kills the president, and I believe he's the second one right after John Vitti. I could be wrong, but he's not. He's also killed by Holiday not long after John Vitti, along with Catwoman giving Batman and Dent the idea to burn the money. It's just stupid. Like they don't really do anything. That was all Catwoman apparently. They're not really changing much of anything from the comic book. However, they're changing the idea of the principle. They're not making them as smart. It's just stupid. One of the minor things that they do is James Jr., Jim Gordon's son, little James, is supposed to be a baby in this because in the comic book, this is not that far from year one. I think this is maybe like a year or so after year one. And in year one, Barbara, Jim's wife, is pregnant. Whereas in this one, they have not only little James, like at like 5 to 8 years old, they also have Barbara Gordon, who is supposed to become Batgirl, also at 5 to 8 years old, and Jim's daughter. Now, I don't mind this because it makes more sense than what they did in the comic books, was essentially make her Jim's niece. But I don't quite get the change. The only thing I can get about the change is that it kind of drives home the point that Jim Gordon lets his family down. That kind of should be understandable for everybody in the family to understand. That's what he has to do. It's his job. So that whole scene really doesn't add anything, and it has no payoff either. So I don't quite get why the scene is there. The music for this thing is one of the good things about this thing. It's eerie, it is good, it's mysterious. However, unlike the comic, the lights and coloring of the film are really bright, so it takes away some of that eeriness and kind of just makes it kind of blands it out to the point where it really doesn't make that much of a difference anyway. Another thing that they do is they completely change how Dent's house blows up, which in turn changes the way that the villains who blew up the house are captured. They change a lot of stuff in this film. If it wasn't for some of the dialogue being the same and it using the same name and the same characters, for the most part, there's only one character that they just took out completely. You wouldn't really much notice it unless you had read the story. So if you haven't read the story, you'll probably be like, I don't quite get this character's motive. It is a horrible travesty on the comic book as well as a movie in and of itself. Gilda is whiny, needy, and annoying. So she is very much so annoying, and I don't really see. And she's a selfish, whiny prick, and pretty much just an annoyance all the way around. Basically, every scene she's in, you're kind of annoyed by her, which will kind of tear away at the ending of the film because that just makes it minute and pointless. They changed the Irish gang into an Asian gang, and the only reason why I can think of this is because they wanted a fight scene. I don't know why they did that. It doesn't make any sense, but they did it, so who cares now? And along with changing the Irish gang, they also changed the scene that Grundy has with the leader of the Irish gang. So, which I guess in this one's the Asian gang. So the only reason why I could think about why they would have changed the Irish gang to an Asian gang, I can't even think of why they wanted to do it. It doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. It adds no purpose. So why change it? And I know Andrew's probably going to be like, well, why does it matter? And it's like exactly my point. So why deliberately change it? There's no reason to. There are very minor sort of thing in the comic book. However, they're very important in the detective aspect of the comic book as well. And you get to see not only the detective aspect of Batman, Commissioner Gordon, and Harvey Dent, which is phenomenal. It's a great scene in the comic book, but they absolutely butcher it here just because they wanted a fight scene, it seems like. Which also Catwoman conveniently comes to help Batman when he needs it and takes down a guy that Batman was struggling to take down. And they change Gilda being in the hospital bed when the house explodes to Harvey being in the hospital bed when the house explodes. The only reason why they changed this is because you'll see later. However, it is not even a good reason. So I don't quite get it. They change Alberto's character to being a prick, not only to his father, to being an uppity, sort of like prick, like just came out of college and thinks he knows everything. So his father should follow his advice. Carmine and Alberto's dynamic changes to the point where it's annoying and sad to see because Carmine held Alberto in high regard despite him not letting Alberto into the fold of the family business, and that hurts Alberto, which I'll get to later. But it's the main crux of this whole comic book, and they completely just disregard it in the film. Harvey is turned into a psycho to some degree. Now, granted, one of the things I did like about this film, and I think it did a better job of this than it did in the comic book, is the way that it treated Two-Face or Harvey's dual personality. I think it set it up better than it did in the comic book, and it makes more sense than in here than it did there. And that's about the only thing better from this I can put into that I think should be put into the comic book. Everything else kind of just sucks or is better off in the comic book. They have a close up of the killer on multiple shots. However, it never looks. It looks like a man now, and they deliberately make it to look like Harvey Dent. And they do it on multiple occasions, which I guess is fine because it's supposed to be a mystery. And however, they do a close up in this, but they never do it in the comic book. It's always shrouded in mystery. You never know who it is. So that's one thing where it was like they deliberately mislead you and lie to you with what you see. Joker's escape, I believe, is different. I know he escapes from Arkham. I don't believe he escapes that way. It is still interesting. They skip over the Joker house kind of thing with him like actually ransacking the house of other people, because you do get to see one of the houses he does ransack. I think the only reason why they cut that out was because it was a black family in the comic book, and I don't think they wanted to show that in the thing. So the Joker and Harvey scene was changed. It was actually way more enjoyable in the comic than it was in this. So that kind of just got torn down to the point where it was annoying. And basically all of Joker's scenes were changed. The whole thing with him being with Falcone, he doesn't like patronize Falcone. He just gets up on him with a card to his neck and says, if you don't find who this Holiday is, I'll kill you. And that's basically all. They extended that way longer than it needed to be. They also do one thing in which they won't show scenes that are in the comic book that are integral to this movie. However, they'll reference them. So some of them they won't even show, which I don't quite get, considering that they added a lot of padding to this already. So I don't know why they didn't just film some of the scenes that they could have done, because a lot of the scenes that they do that are new could have very easily been cut out, as they didn't really add much of anything to the film. Johnny Vito, which is Carmine Falcone's bodyguard, and Joker's fight scene is different. I did like the way that they were fighting. However, it ends with Vito being on the floor and kind of passing out, and then Holiday coming and killing him. However, this one, Vito dies stupidly. Not only is he upright and all good and fine, but he's also got his gun when Holiday goes to shoot him. And he also faces Holiday when Holiday clearly has a gun ready to shoot him. It's weird and stupid, and that part didn't make much sense. The New Year Dent fight scene where the Gilda and Harvey are fighting is not necessary, doesn't add to the plot any. If anything, it just makes Gilda look more like a prick, because she's doing this in the middle of a party. Batman being on the yacht with the Falcone kind of thing, with the Falcone party, changes the whole dynamic of Batman actually going to catch or on the trail of Joker during the whole time he's getting the airplane, which also changes the whole way that Batman actually catches the Joker. And it's in a way more interesting way in the comic book than it is in the movie. You will hear me say that a lot throughout this thing if you haven't already. Bruce and Selina were never a thing, like they weren't actually dating in the comic book, whereas they actually are in here. However, they both were flirting, and ironically, they were both flirting with each other, both as Bruce and Selina, as well as Batman and Catwoman. However, it's never implied that they actually know who each other is underneath the mask. So it's an interesting relationship and could be quite more interesting if they would have done it properly. Catwoman shouldn't have been able to lift Batman's watch. I just don't think that should have been able to happen. And if they were going to do that, he should have been able to lift something off of her. That would have been a fair game. More bad things about Gilda. Basically, she is annoying throughout the whole thing. Joker and Batman fight scene. I already said that the comic book is has a way more interesting conversation with Batman and Joker on the plane than it does in the movie. From the comic book to movie's perspective, comic book is way more interesting in basically all facets. I highly recommend you go watch it. There's definitely some problems I have with the comic book, but highly recommend you go watch it or go read it. My bad, not watch this film. Alberto's character isn't the greatest. I don't like it. I don't like the way they changed him up. Now, he's not the greatest person in the comic book either, but they definitely changed his character up to the point where you no longer really care. Selina gives up that Bruce is Batman in front of Alberto and possibly also in front of Holiday, which doesn't really make any sense and really shouldn't have happened because Selina should be a professional by this point. So that's one of the things where it's just like, it doesn't need to happen, so why did it? Now, Alberto, in this scene where he is talking with Batman and Catwoman, and Batman thinks that Alberto is Holiday, goes and decides to get Alberto and take him into justice. Alberto instead just spills out everything, saying he doesn't want this life, even though it seemed earlier like he did, and that he just wants to walk away from everything and would like to go and be with his first wife, which you will find out later was Gilda. Spoiler, I don't care. However, you find out later that she ends up being the Holiday killer, and this is crucial because she hears the whole conversation and decides to kill him anyway. So she is a prick, and she just kills him regardless, even though you can see that he realizes he made a mistake. He's learned from that. He seems to have want to do right by the accidents he did, and she still goes ahead and kills him. Now, in the comic book, Carmine is very more so depressed about Alberto's death than he is in this, and it's just a sad kind of thing that happened. Poison Ivy being introduced to Bruce Wayne through Alberto's death wasn't quite the same in the comic book. In the comic book, she just happened to pass by both Bruce and Selina. She gave him a flower. It pricked his skin. She ends up going to his house and ends up taking him over like what happened in the movie. There's a whole bunch of things that happen off screen, like the car deaths outside of Maroni's restaurant happens off screen, doesn't really take into effect. You don't get to really see that was actually Falcone's hitmen for Maroni, as well as the safe house. That Maroni's safe house is also hit by Holiday as well, killing most, if not all, his bodyguards. Batman being under Poison Ivy's control went way longer than in the comics. In the comics, it stops on St. Patrick's Day. In the movie, it stops on April Fool's. The fight between Catwoman and Poison Ivy went on a little bit longer than it should have. And in the comic book, Poison Ivy is never captured. She goes back, and you find out that she was hired by Carmine Falcone, and that's the way you find out in the comic book. In this, you already know because she is with Carmine Falcone at the funeral, and that's how you find out that she was hired by Falcone. And so the comic book did a far better job and was far more superior in that way. The movie also skipped the April Fool's Day thing with the Riddler. It was a far superior way to not only one, bring in the Riddler, who is also one of the people that, like, out of everybody else here, besides Batman and oddly enough Joker, Riddler would also be one of the other people curious to find out who this Holiday person is and be trying to solve that mystery as it was. Catwoman never rescues Batman from the fear toxin after fighting Scarecrow. That never really happens. Batman ends up going into the alleyway. I think later gets later takes off his costume, becomes Bruce Wayne, and ends up going to his mother's grave. And that's where Jim and Harvey Dent find him and then take him back to the, what's it called? I think they take him back to the mansion. They then come back later and go to question him, which I believe they do on Father's Day, if I'm not mistaken, either after Mother's Day or on Father's Day. Sophia Falcone was introduced later way later into the story than she was in the comic book. In the comic book, she was actually there when on St. Patrick's Day when Carmine is in a car going by Sam Maroney's headquarters to go do a hit on Sam Maroney. That was actually supposed to be Sophia Falcone and not Carmine Falcone. Sophia was never wanting to go into the fold as she was she was kind of already in it and she was pleasant in the job she was doing. She never wanted to be the head honcho like she kind of showed in this and wanted to be his successor. Carmine Falcone being fixed goes longer than it should with the whole Thomas Wayne flashback and his father, the Falcone's father, and all that stuff, and him having bullets in the chest goes on way longer than it should. Isn't really necessary. Was it okay? I guess. However, it kind of makes things a little bit weird. They also skipped the courtroom scene with Harvey Dent and Gordon kind of trying to prosecute Wayne as Holiday. However, for whatever reason, they kept some of the dialogue that Alfred had, and it didn't make any sense to have it in there. It doesn't really make much sense. They're going more so for the nostalgia points instead of actually trying to make a cohesive story. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, Salvatore Maroni and Sophia Falcone are a thing in the comics. However, you don't find that out until way later in the comic when Maroni is in jail just before the hearing and Sophia goes to see him. Sophia isn't there at all when Luigi dies, and they got rid of the dogs for some reason because the dogs are there when Luigi Maroni gets murdered. The Maroni scene was kind of off with Dent and everything. That was kind of weird. It just wasn't as good as it was in the comic book. I think some of it was the same, some of it was different. July 4th went down way differently. Scarecrow bank heist doesn't happen on panel, whereas it does on this, if it ever did in the panel. Carmine doesn't also send another hitman after Dent during the 4th of July thing. That never really happens. After the first attempt, he kind of just leaves Dent alone. Batman is never caught by Scarecrow and Mad Hatter, so that scene never really happened. He just catches him at the graveyard and ends up taking him down. Whereas in this, he was captured at the bank and then takes him out of the graveyard. And he takes him out in the very similar fashion that he did in the comic book. However, it isn't necessary. In a lot of the things, Gilda frames Harvey Dent, especially during that one scene in which he is fighting the guy in the sewer. She does frame him because it is her holiday pistol, and she does leave her trademark. And if you haven't guessed already, Gilda is Holiday. And she, not only does she leave all the stuff there, but she also leaves Harvey Dent there, covered in the guy's blood, sort of framing him to be found by the police. It's not the greatest look, and it doesn't help the case any, because she repeatedly treats him like trash the whole time. They messed up Harvey in the courtroom, and it seems like they did this to pad time more so than actually try to make a good scene. They took out Harvey Dent's intern Vernon, probably because they didn't know what to do with the character after they already changed so much. They changed so much about the comic from this movie to the point where halfway through the second part, it's a completely different story. Even though they try to put stuff in it at the same way. And it's just ridiculous and kind of stupid. Two-Face and Solomon Grundy meeting was rushed. I don't know why they decided to rush Two-Face and Solomon Grundy's meeting, but they decided to rush it, and it was actually a good scene in the comic book. They did Maroni's death scene differently. However, they still made Batman. They kept Batman as a SWAT, but the whole scene where Maroni dies was changed as Gordon and Batman take him into the sewer with Batman being in SWAT disguise, and that's when Holiday kills him, kind of revealing that Alberto is Holiday. He shoots Batman, the SWAT guy, and then also kills Maroni. and then goes to shoot Gordon. However, Batman gets out of the SWAT uniform and takes down Alberto, and that's how that goes down. They mess up Bruce's parents by making them out to be these sort of like people who would go along with villains. Now, I don't know why, but they did. It was kind of pathetic and not really supposed to happen. Catwoman repeatedly saves Batman's life, and it never goes the other way around for whatever reason. So it's annoying and weird. Selina being a Falcone, or being found out as a Falcone, or telling Batman that she is a Falcone, or that she thinks she's related to a Falcone, is weird and out of place in the story. There's a reason why it didn't happen in the comic book. Now, granted, they did it later in another separate comic book as to the reason why she was following Falcone. However, in this story, it's not necessary and not needed. Now, I don't like it, but that's the way they did it. They skipped the coming up the building stuff with all the villains and kind of just instead put a scene where the villains walk down the street. Because in the comic book, you get to see a whole bunch of bodyguards just dying repeatedly, just like panels of like Falcone and Sophia getting ready to like guard whatever they have left from the villains that are coming up. And it is just, it's like most things in this movie, it's better done in the comic book. Two-Face and Carmine talk is not in the comic, or it's not as long. It doesn't take near as long. Two-Face probably does talk about fate, but they do take a long time trying to get it done. And in the comic book, Catwoman is with the other criminals actually, and not with Batman. Batman comes in and tries to convince Catwoman to not do anything stupid. Catwoman does it, and actually when Sophia Falcone goes to kill Batman because she thinks he's the reason as to why her father's dead, she actually jumps on her back. They end up going out the window, and the scene where Catwoman is actually holding on to Sophia is actually from the comic book, and she does fall. Granted, I don't know why they did this weird change, but they did. Let's see. Falcone in the comic doesn't die slowly after 2 shots in the head. Falcone in the comic dies immediately, whereas in the movie, he slowly dies, which I would think after 2 shots in the head, you would die immediately. But I digress. Batman finds out that Gilda was the killer, and this is the weird part, and the part where it made me go BS on the whole thing and just call it as bull for the whole thing, was that Gilda is the killer. He deduces that Gilda is the killer by the end and lets her go, which makes no sense. That's not something Batman would ever do. If you had maybe another superhero, maybe I could see it. However, most of them wouldn't, and especially not Batman. This thing is pretty horrible. I don't. It's just not the greatest. It just sucks. Now now in the comic book, it is more interesting as to how you don't quite know who the character is because they make you question everything. Because there are scenes, there is nobody else to reference it, and it doesn't. Some of the scenes don't make sense. Like the whole thing about Riddler being a speculation is interesting. Now, if you were not watching this, and if they did not throw off your scent with basically making it a dude, making it look like it was a dude in the trench coat instead of just like a normal person, and kind of just blacking out everything instead of just mostly everything, you would probably automatically assume it's Gilda just because of the way that her character acts and everything else. They did that for you to throw it off the scent. However, if you don't have any prior knowledge of the comic book and go into this thing, you're easily going to know it's Gilda Dent, because she is an unstable, backstabbing person in this film, and you got nothing else. There's really nothing you can prove to me otherwise, as she not only seeks justice, but she also makes Harvey more so in danger and doesn't care at all for his safety. So, yeah, she does not win Wife of the Year award, at least. They decided to make Gilda a backstabbing person who needs to see justice. However, Batman just deciding that her killing people is okay because she had a bad experience isn't really something Batman would do. He'd put her in jail, make her get help, and more than likely she'd be in there for a very, very long time. Not saying she would never get out, but she'd probably be in there for a very, very long time, considering that the experience she had underwent. The whole thing is just stupid. There's probably millions of more problems I can just pick at with this movie, but these are just the ones that I went through. I didn't mind the art style. I did like the character designs and most of the set designs. However, I think the way the animation was done and the coloration wasn't the greatest, and it's a shame because the character design and some of the art style was really good. So it's just a shame that it just looks this kind of new way that they're doing it, which is kind of cheesy, which is one of the things I didn't quite like about. It's kind of the same style that everything has been in, and it's starting to get annoying because it's starting to look more and more cheap just by the way that they do it. Like sometimes the mouth won't move at the right time, or sometimes it just doesn't look right with the way that what they're portraying. Like the face sometimes is just still. They'd have no emotion on the face sometimes, which is annoying. It kind of takes away, kind of takes you out of the movie. In all honesty, one thing that I do not like or don't see as a good enough reason to why to change something is Gilda Dent being the killer changes a lot of the things that should have happened in the story and also a lot of the killings that went on in the story. Because the reason why she says she goes to kill the Falcones is because of what they did to her, which, if you don't know, in the movie, she and Alberto fall in love. They have a baby out of wedlock, and he decides to go ahead and get married to her. However, Carmine doesn't want a child out of wedlock and decides to make her abort the baby. Kind of honestly reminds me of what's his face? Mark Hamill. So they essentially make her have an abortion, and that seems to be the only reason as to why. Which, I mean, it's a horrible reason. Don't get me wrong. It's just that's it. However, and that makes her have like a problem with the Falcons. Now, she also goes and kills some of Maroni's men. Now, I don't know why she would go kill Maroni, considering that he had nothing to do with it. Maybe she just has a prejudice against Italians. I have no idea, but it doesn't make any sense. Like, it makes sense as to why she would go kill Falcone's men. However, it doesn't make any sense as to why she would also go kill Maroni's men. Because Maroni wouldn't have been involved in this. If anything, not only did she provoke Carmine in trying to kill her husband, but she also provoked Maroni into basically not only aligning with Falcone and also scarring her husband for life. So she's the real villain of this. It sucks that they took a character and changed a whole lot about her just to ruin a story, in all honesty. For people who are like, well, she was in the comic book, she was Holiday in the comic book, it says so in the comic book. No, she isn't. It doesn't explicitly say she is Holiday. She claims she's Holiday. However, it's never verified that she is Holiday. Alberto is verified as being a Holiday. It makes a lot of sense. They deduce it with the coroner claiming to have found Alberto's body, lying to Carmine Falcone, and Alberto going and killing him before he can speak. That makes sense. The death of the guy who's selling Alberto the guns makes sense. The death of his aunt, who actually goes and finds the file to kind of verify what the coroner was saying was true or not later on when she has doubts, and her dying, and a lot of this stuff. It does make sense when you realize he was trying to get back at the family. He was trying to get at the family, so he didn't want, and it makes sense because he didn't want the law to come down on the people that were going to expose the family before he could go kill them, take out Johnny Vitti and the gang that could very easily speak. And it just makes sense. Boom, 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 boom. He takes out pieces, and it all seems to fall into play. Now, Dent does remark later on in the comic book that there are technically two Holiday killers, mainly because he kills Falcone, I believe, on Labor Day or Halloween or Thanksgiving, something to that vicinity. And the day he ends up killing Falcone is on a holiday. So that's the whole reason as to why he says technically there were two Holiday killers. He kills not only Falcone, he also kills Vernon, because Vernon is actually the reason as to why Sal Maroni had the acid. So yeah, the only reason why Gilda says she was Holiday is probably because she got demented when she was in the hospital after the explosion. And this is my theory because it's not really technically proven. However, the best case, what I'm thinking thought process is that she possibly thinks she was Holiday after undergoing that explosion. It probably caused some head trauma. Her undergoing some head trauma, and the Holiday killings going on along with her being in the hospital, along with that undergoing with what Harvey Dent is undergoing. it makes sense as to why that could possibly have been some head trauma. Explains why she thought she was Holiday, because during the gang one in the comic book, she is in the hospital and she cannot get out, cannot be Holiday. However, I think she is deluded into thinking she is Holiday, and it honestly makes sense. Both movies are all right if you haven't if you haven't read the comic book. The movies are going to be okay, 5-ish. I'm not going to say it's great. It's not horrible. Well, it's only after you read the comic book that you're just like, okay, so this was just banking off of nostalgia of a well-known tale and actually not trying to tell the tale in the movie format. It was just trying to tell its own story while going off of the tale nostalgia. So yeah, 3 out of 10 for both of them. Actually, no, I'm gonna rank it lower. 2 out of 10 for both of them. It's not that good. Not really much redeeming qualities. There is some good stuff that comes out of it. The guy who voices Batman voiced Red Hood and Batman Under the Red Hood, and the guy who voiced Lego Batman, Troy Baker, who voiced like Batman and Lego Batman games, Lego DC games, voices the Joker in this. So I did think that was cool. Thought that was well done. Thought they did a good job with what they were given. Some of the Joker's dialogue was funny. However, they do that and then skip a lot of the dialogue that was also in there. That was also funny that he did. They do a lot of new dialogue in the movie that was good. However, they skip a lot of dialogue that would have been good from the comic book as well. So, yeah, not a great film. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below as to whether or not you agree or disagree with me. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And we will talk to you later.